Today I am going to return to my oldest recipe on my website. This is the very first recipe that I put on my website back in August of 2010. It's coming up on 7 years old, and so is the video. So I want to redo the video. This is for just basic white bread, and I think baking bread is one of the most satisfying pastimes. I've been baking all my own bread for years. It's also very economical. If you buy flour like I do at Costco in the big 25-pound sack, I can make bread for 25 cents a loaf. So today is a rainy, cool, almost cold day. It's a good day for baking. This recipe, by the way, is based upon a Julia Child recipe. The only thing I changed, if I remember correctly, is the salt. I use less salt. I don't like too much salt in my food. Anyways, let's bake bread. I'm going to use the bowl from my stand mixer because the last time I did the video 7 years ago, I did everything by hand. But this time I'm going to use my stand mixer. I'll leave the earlier video on YouTube, but this one I'll be basically doing the same recipe, but I'll be doing it in a mixer. So what I have here is 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast. I'm adding to that 1 cup of warm water. When I say warm, it's about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius. And let's see, one of these is sugar and one is salt. Sugar is sparkly, salt is not. So this is sugar. I'm adding 1 tablespoon of sugar to this. Mix that in. And then what I want to do is, what I want to see is some foaming. If it foams after a few minutes, then that tells me the yeast is good. I know my yeast is good because I bought a new package of yeast this morning. My yeast is foaming merrily away. I knew this would be good yeast. As I said, I bought it this morning. You can add it next 1.5 cups of warm water, but I'm going to actually add beer because I like the flavor of beer in bread. I think it gives it a more bready flavor. I know that's odd, but I like the flavor of it. And then I'm going to add 1 pound. This is half of my flour. I'm starting off with 2 pounds, 900 grams all-purpose flour. Oh, and by the way, 1.5 cups of water is 355 milliliters. Okay, I'm starting off with 2 pounds, 900 grams all-purpose flour. I also always work with weight rather than volumetrically when baking because it just makes the bread, the baked goods, come out better. If you want to know by volume, it's about 6 1/3 cups of flour, 2 pounds. If you figure that an average cup is 5 ounces per cup, I'm going to put the 1 pound of flour, half my flour, in there and stir that in. Having mixed up my liquid and flour, that first pound of flour, here's the remainder of my flour. I put it in a little container that I can pour, and I mixed into this 2 teaspoons of salt. Julia Child uses a tablespoon. It's just a little too salty for me. So 2 teaspoons, but use a tablespoon if you like salt. I'm going to work this in a little at a time while the machine is rotating. I might as well bring my bowl up. I fitted it with a dough hook, and I'm going to see what I've got in the bowl when all my flour is in. You never know from time to time what you're going to end up with because flour changes throughout the year. Sometimes it absorbs a little more liquid, sometimes less. So sometimes you need to add a little bit more water. Sometimes you need to add a little more flour to get the consistency you want. I'll explain all that or show you what I want when I get to that point. So I'm going to put my machine on number 2 and start working in the flour. Okay, my bread has started to come together, the dough. I've got a bowl scraper here, and I'm just going to scrape down the side of the bowl to get the stuff that's stuck to the sides, get that incorporated. Okay, that looks good. And then I'm going to return this to number 2, and I'm going to knead the dough in the bowl for 10 minutes. Now what I look for at this point is, do I have the right ratio of flour to water? As I mentioned, sometimes I have to add more flour, sometimes I have to add more water. You never know what you're going to end up with because flour changes throughout the year. What I like to see is sticking in the bottom of the bowl. I want to see the dough sticking to the bottom of the bowl but pulling away from the sides. What I'm seeing here is, I can get my dough hook out. It's sticking a little bit, but it's pulling up from the bottom too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add about a tablespoon of water. It's going to take a while to work that in. If I can get this lined up right. Add about a tablespoon of water. Work that in. A little bit more. That was about a teaspoon. Okay. And then hopefully I'll get the sticking that I'm looking for. I have one thing left to do. I want to work in some fat, and I'm going to be using whole butter, and that in itself could change the ratio. So what I'm going to do is cut a hole into the dough with a knife, put about a tablespoon of butter in there, cover it over, and then work that in. The dough is going to come apart because of the fat, but you just keep working it and it'll come back together again. When I figured out about that ratio, that's when I started making successful bread. It should be sticky. It is. I'm going to move this to the counter because I want to clean this bowl out, but it shouldn't be so sticky that you can't knead it. As you can see, I can work that around by hand, and it's not overly sticky, but it is sticky. Okay, I got to clean up. I'm going to use this bowl, same bowl for rising, but I do want to clean it out first and then grease it. I buttered the inside of my clean bowl well. Going to lift this off the counter. Put that in there. And then I'm going to butter the top of this dough a little bit because it's going to rise and there's going to be plastic on top of this bowl. And I don't want it to stick to the plastic when it comes into contact with it. Okay. Now I'm going to cover the bowl and I'm going to leave this in a warm place. I usually put it on top of my refrigerator for about an hour. I want to see that dough rise up just above, a little bit higher than the rim of this bowl. My dough has been rising for an hour and a half now. But before I get to that, I want to explain my strange looking bread pans here. I think these might be meatloaf pans rather than bread pans. I don't know. I've had them since my college days. The problem I have with them is they're too wide, and when the dough bakes, I get these like a muffin top, and it's too big to fit in my toaster. So I put these big flanges on the side, and then I line them with parchment paper to keep the dough from spreading out too wide. It holds it in place. And now here is my dough after it's been rising, as I said, for an hour and a half. That should peel off without tearing because I buttered the top of that dough. I'm going to punch this down, or basically shake it down to deflate it a little bit. See how it's just falling down? And then I'm going to pull it out, divide it in half, and put it in my bread pans. Okay, I'm going to use a bench scraper, I think, to divide this dough in half. All right. And then working one piece at a time, I'm going to just kind of shape this into a loaf. Like so. And then Lay that inside the pan. Do my other one. Same thing, kind of just pull the sides up, pinch it together so that I have a loaf, and then put that in the bread pans. Okay, again, I'm going to cover these with plastic, and I'm going to let them rise for about an hour. My dough has been rising now for just over an hour. I've been heating my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 190 degrees Celsius, roughly. You can, if you want, you can slit the tops. These will go through what's called oven spring. As soon as they go in the oven, they're going to rapidly expand, and creating a vent in the top just gives it a little bit more room to expand. Do the other one. These loaves look so good already. Okay, I'm going to put these in the oven, and I'm going to bake these for 35 to 45 minutes. I usually go 40 minutes. I find that's enough. Here are my loaves of bread, fresh from the oven. In a moment, I'll transfer these loaves to that cooling rack that's underneath, and then comes the hard part, waiting for them to fully cool down before I slice into them. You're not supposed to technically cut into bread while it's too hot, because the starches in there are still in a semi-liquid state. If you let the bread cool down a little bit, quite a bit, the starches will solidify. This has cooled down enough. I'm ready to slice into it. I'll cut toward the middle a little bit. See how it looks inside. Nice tender crumb. How does that look? Homemade bread. I'm going to cut a couple of slices and put them in the toaster, because that's how I like to have my bread. So there they are, a couple of slices of my homemade bread. Tastes like homemade bread. Delicious. I love making bread. Okay, excuse me, I'm going to go enjoy a late afternoon snack of toasted homemade bread. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit my website, mobilehomegourmet.com, and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.